We have three amazing panelists today. Talesh, a Canadian Magento architect. He always had a keen interest in security and recently started evangelizing defensive development practices in Magento. Alex Kramer, VP of International and Military Antiques. He joined the company in 2004, leading a digital growth strategy and was able to grow the business 300% over the years. And it will soon become clear why he's joining us today. And Philip Jackson, Magento and e-commerce veteran with over 15 years of experience. He has all Magento certifications, all four, right? And is leading or co-hosting a very popular Mage Talk podcast, organizing Florida Magento meetups, and is one of the most active people on Stack Exchange. So, Talesh, why don't you start with telling us about best practices?
So, when we talk about Magento, and I'd just like to point out the slides, you would be able to download them from this URL. So no need to take photos. When we start talking about security in business, we need to be aware of the stakes and the game plan. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly cover the stakes that we're facing in the e-commerce space. And then we'll spend a lot more time on the game plan that businesses should invest in. And the stakes go like this. We as Magento developers, store owners, we are stewards of our customers' identities and finances. And we'll have to be protecting these from a whole host of attackers, be it script kiddies in a coffee shop, advanced hackers, or even nation states that are spying on their citizens. And the stark reality of not doing so is becoming more and more apparent. And here's some quick numbers I displayed earlier. This is the average cost to businesses in the last 3 years who have had data breaches. So we're talking in the millions. $6.53 million in 2015 was the average data breach cost to an organization. And the interesting thing that this research from IBM and the Ponemon Institute came up with was that the retail sector experienced the most significant increase. And obviously this is of concern to everybody who's doing e-commerce in whatever shape or form. But the unique position is that we have Magento taking a very proactive approach, and this is where our game plan starts. And since Magento as a product is a foundation for what we build our e-commerce on, this website, magento.com/security, is a foundation for what we should build our security practice on. It's got best practices, latest news, the patches that we all know of, and the security mailing list includes no advertising, just notifications of security issues as a Magento store owner or a Magento system integrator. And most importantly, there's an option for responsible disclosure should you find something going on with Magento. But I like to say that nobody runs a vanilla Magento store. We all have customizations to it and extensions we add to it. And this is where we come to a little bit more advanced game plan. And I like to I'm a huge advocate of the information assurance model. And it's broken down to the three simple words: people, process, and technology. The people, and the NSA is a huge proponent of this also, and they tackle the most overlooked things first. So they talk about people, and they talk about the processes you should implement before they even get to what technologies you should use for securing your website or your business. And if you think about it, if you empower the correct people in your organizations, they will help you put the processes and technology in place. And if people are not following the processes, it doesn't matter what technologies you have in place. And finally, when it comes to technology, there's no silver bullet. You've got to constantly be on top of whatever technology you're using to protect your site. So let's drill down. People. People are sadly the most overlooked part of security, and really it's not that difficult to implement a plan for having the right people in your organization. And since we're limited on time, I'm going to cover the one mistake that most companies make when they want to ramp up the security of their team. And it's an easy trap to fall into if you're in a rush. And basically how it works is you need to invest in your own team first. You see, Magento is complicated, and bringing in an external team of penetration testers or a security-only team first means that they'll be learning your applications and your architecture to find the vulnerabilities. And that's extremely inefficient from a business point of view. So it's more efficient to just start with your internal developers or your chosen solution provider to help you establish a security team, some people who are going to be stewards of your application data security and your application security. And you could teach a developer or a QA the OWASP top 10 and have them be functional within a week when it comes to securing your site. But it's going to be harder to bring an external team to come in. And there's a reason for this. It's because when it comes to developers, there's a lot of egos involved. Developers want to build unbreakable code. And if you're hiring an external penetration testing team, they want to be feared for their prowess. So when you have that sort of relationship, it's antagonistic. What you want is your developers and your engineering team rowing along with the same speed as your security-focused team. And the best way to do that is build from within first. And the main reason, and what I want to do is jump across to Alex now, and he's going to tell us a little bit of his experience hiring an external team and the expenses he's incurred with that.
So the way, in short, I'm sitting up here, I'm a vendor or a merchant. I'm sitting up here because we had a data breach this last year, and the way we found out about it was we got a letter from Visa saying that we may have been victims of a common point of purchase. Basically what that meant is legitimate transactions are happening in our site, but later those cards were being compromised, and the one point of purchase that was in common with those compromised cards was our website. It was terrifying. There's no short way to do it. And the reason it was terrifying is because Visa said, we will start fining you if you can't contain it. We will force you into a forensic audit. And if you haven't been through that, it is awful. And the other thing is there's a lot of shame that goes into this. I don't think I've ever really heard a merchant talk about having a data breach. I equate it to like a venereal disease. 1 in 5 people get it. Nobody wants to admit it or talk about it. And you're not even sure what doctor to go to. So when the first process we did was, okay, we'll do a code audit ourselves. And then that didn't reveal anything. And it's a long story, but in essence, we never found it. And I spent over $50,000 with external teams doing penetration testing, and we passed everything. So we knew there was something going on. We could not find it. And I didn't have a response plan. I didn't really have a plan. So that's why I volunteered to sort of come up and share that. So outside teams can work. You don't want to be forced into that if you don't have to. And ultimately, the people who found it were Magento themselves. And it was just a little bit of code in the footer of our website on a CMS page that we never even thought to check. And it wasn't in the transmission, and it wasn't being stored on our database. It was essentially taking a screenshot of the checkout cart page and pinging it to a server in the Ukraine. It took about 30 seconds to remove the code once we found it.
So yeah, the internal team is your best bet for working with security. And this is not to say that external teams are not bad, but if you're going to hire one, it's usually at an advanced stage where you have an internal team that's working well for you and you need a little bit more. And the one thing you need to look for if you're hiring an external security-only team is that they should provide you pull requests as opposed to PDFs. If they're just throwing a 400-page PDF across the wall, it's just something automated that they're just giving to you. You want someone who's going to be working with you collaboratively. So now we have our collaborative team and our people set up in place. Let's talk about process, the next big thing. And process can be difficult. Luckily, in our industry, we have something that lays the groundwork, and it's called PCI Compliance. Unfortunately, PCI Compliance can be a little bit tricky. There's a lot of myths, a lot of missteps, but we here today are lucky because we've got Mr. Philip Jackson, who is a master at the art of PCI Compliance.
Thanks, Talish. So PCI compliance is literally the most boring topic in the entire world. So I have the joy of speaking about it here today. You know, It's that thing that we all have to do and the thing that none of us really want to do, that we're forced into doing. If you are a merchant here in the United States, your credit card processor will require this of you. Depending on the processor, they may require you to do this on an annual basis or even more frequently. If you're outside of the United States, PCI is a great general guideline to follow for applying best practice to how your business encounters credit card data. So let's start with a few PCI myths up front. The first one is, if I don't store credit cards, then PCI doesn't apply to me. Any guesses? That's false. In actuality, PCI compliance covers every area of your business, not just the data interchange that happens on your website. It's everywhere where you may encounter a customer's personal information with regard to payments. Online transactions, as you probably know in this omni-channel world that we live in, is one very small part of it. And as we continue to grow new verticals in omni-channel, this becomes increasingly important because there will inevitably be a time where your business comes in contact with a credit card despite your best efforts to protect yourself by using external services or using PayPal or using, no matter what you do, your business will come into contact with a credit card, and PCI gives you the tools that you need to be able to define processes of how you as a business deal with that. So the real burden of PCI is on your business process. There are definite technological burdens in PCI. There can be very stringent burdens on your business and your technology, but at the end of the day, it comes down to your process and the way you've documented your processes and how you deal with credit card information. So no matter the size of your business, your payment provider can actually require you to test at just about any self-assessment level. PCI is self-governance, which means instead of governments all over the world deciding that they would each have arbitrary requirements for data security when dealing with credit cards, the card industry decided, the payment card industry, PCI, decided that they would self-govern. And they came up with some, what some would characterize as some fairly draconian requirements for you to have to follow. And what you're trying to do, we're all trying to game the system. We want to do as little as humanly possible, right? Because we have businesses to run. And so it really grades, letter grades A, B, C, and D. And so at the end of the day, really what we're all trying to get to is that letter grade A, the A+, right? That's the best. Really, A really means it's just you've done as little as possible because your business doesn't really encounter credit cards. You've offloaded it to a third party. And obviously that means on the other end of the spectrum, D would be the worst. And so we'll kind of cover that in a little bit. PCI, this is another PCI myth, number 2. PCI means that you can't store credit card data at all. And that actually is also false. Your bank stores your credit card information all the time. So somebody has to be able to store a credit card somewhere along the line. But the truth is, it could be way too burdensome for you to ever really want to do that in your business. When you begin to store credit cards, immediately a lot of things in your business come into scope. For instance, it is very difficult for you to answer PCI factually and to answer it truthfully and to get into every one of the 192 questions or whatever the questionnaire is these days in 3.1 and to maintain a wireless network. Wi-Fi networks are among the most exploited vectors in any business, and a lot of times not even really from bad guys on the outside, a lot of times it's from employees on the inside. So SAQC, if you begin to store credit cards, is kind of where you immediately fall, and that starts to exempt you from things that you probably need, right? Wi-Fi, it may require you to put closed-circuit television cameras in your office, so it becomes very difficult. We're aiming for A. And for the most part, you really should never, just as a matter of best practice, access any of this type of information over Wi-Fi in general. If you have a local office, plug it in, right? And try to just respect your customers' data because their security is really your biggest responsibility. Because it's all based on self-assessment and you are assessing yourself and your own compliance, really the gateway can come, or your processor can come to you at any time and say, we, for whatever reason, believe that you should now assess at a much higher level. We believe that you represent either a risk to our business or a risk to your customers, or you're just doing way too well, but we want you to be able to assess yourself and make sure that you're covering all your bases. So you have to be ready for this stuff. There's a lot of factors that can affect whether or not you'll have to assess at a higher level, and they're all listed here. Among the highest are really when you're growing out of control, you may already actually qualify for PCI-A, and they may require you to qualify for PCI-C. And this could be completely arbitrary, and Alex will share a little bit of that later. So this is a little bit of data. If you do get these slides, I encourage you to dig into it. If you're trying to go to sleep at night and you're having a hard time, this is a great thing to read. But in actuality, really, we're aiming for one place and one place only, and that's to remove your business from gaining any credit card information at all. And some people would just say use PayPal, and I think it's a little bit deeper than that. For C and D, C is probably the next best. It's probably where you would likely fall if you're being very honest about your business and the way that you do business, and we'll get into that a little bit here. Now, so number 3, if I implement and follow all PCI guidelines, then I am safe from attacks by default. Well, that's also false. And the reason is it's just a guideline. It asks you to honestly evaluate yourself among a bunch of criteria and enforce those best practices. So rotating your passwords every 90 days. If you store those passwords in Magento, that they would be stored with strong encryption. You have to document in your business who in your business has the right to come into contact with credit card information. Not everybody in your business should be given that privilege. It should be on a need-to-know basis. And then also tracking people and their movement not only on the website but in and out of your physical location. So again, these can be pretty terse. Even if you pass PCI, I mentioned this a little bit ago, even if you pass PCI, you can still be susceptible to threats. And that's because most compromises today are due to people with insider information or people from on the inside, disgruntled employees, or opportunistic attacks. There's so many stories in the OWASP mailing list about people who don't even know why they stole the data that they stole. It was just there, and it was a fleeting moment, and they decided to take it. So we got to lock down our business processes and limit the number of people that have contact with this kind of information. Number 3, if I use iframe payments or some hosted field, or if the payments aren't even on my website, if it goes off to PayPal, then PCI does not apply to me. Well, PCI probably doesn't apply to your web application, but PCI still applies to your business because your business takes credit cards. There's a lot of ways that customers can give you a credit card that you weren't expecting, and now all of a sudden you have to deal with. My favorite is when I accidentally type the credit card number into the name field of a credit card form. Who's ever done that? And then you hit submit. I've gotten emails with, thank you, Mr. 4738, exactly. Another way that it can be broken is if you have a call center with recorded lines and credit card numbers are read aloud on the line, you have to have a way of dealing with those. Your call center may have a means of actually scrubbing that information out. They may also already be PCI compliant to the way that they store it. But if you're doing that in-house, I would really review those business processes. The other problem is that sometimes those credit card numbers that are read aloud on these on the recorded line, those go to backups, and those backups go to offsite storage, and those aren't always stored in a secure way. And then, obviously, us developers, we have godlike control over the application, and we can log and capture any information that's coming into Magento at any point in time. We have unbelievable power, and sometimes we don't always wield it with a PCI or a security-conscious mindset. And the problem is that when we log, when we're trying to fix issues on your site, and we're logging information that's coming into the site, that stuff's going to go into a log. Sometimes logs are part of backups, and sometimes backups are stored off-site, and it's the same problem all over again. So those are all ways that PCI can break down. Customer service can also break down PCI for you. They write down the credit card number to capture an order during an outage. Again, backups and logs can create tremendous issues. Developers who store information to their local machines while creating local developer environments. Not only do those create PCI concerns, they create privacy concerns in general. So there's a few other considerations on the aspect of physical security. I mentioned CCTV. This can be as easy for a small office as installing a Nest Cam or putting in a little webcam that can do this, you can meet that requirement. For much larger offices, it can be as difficult as key code access to your server room, guest log or a guest sign-in book with a desk agent, somebody that has to sit near the front door. It really has to do with the size of your business and your ability to protect yourself. Again, what the whole thing we're doing is moving, it's indemnity. It's moving the liability off of you. If and when you are ever breached, you want to be able to have record of having followed every process, put every process in place, and know that you considered everything and answered PCI fairly, because the indemnity no longer falls to you to have to own the result of the breach. Really, it falls onto the processor and the insurances that then kick in. And again, I mentioned Wi-Fi. And then business process, and I think this is where we tie back in to what Alex and Talesh were speaking about, which is only allowing those in the organization on a need-to-know basis. That means documenting it in their job description that they should be able to come in contact with credit card information. Creating and drafting an information security policy that's reviewed twice a year and is agreed to during onboarding for new members of your organization, that you have a documented means of dealing with information security, performing background checks for those types of people on the need-to-know basis in your business, and then paying a lot of money to then spend a lot of time and effort in your business to review all of that stuff basically every 90 days. And then inevitably something may happen. There's a lot of hardware and software that you can purchase to allow you to kind of mitigate the risk. There's intrusion detection at the firewall level. There's stateful VPN that can drop a connection on the event of a breach. So there's a lot of interesting technology that can be put into place, but as Talesh was saying, it really hinges and is based on the people that you have in your employ. And now I will turn it back over to Talesh.
Process, if you get it wrong, it could tank your site. So it's important you get that right. And if you remember, he mentioned that technology really depends on the processes you put in and the people who are using it. So, and what we'll try to do is we'll cover some technology recommendations just so you have something solid to take away to help you get your security team started. If you have a team that's already in place and you have some processes in place, just some suggestions as to where to start. And I like starting with the tools you already have. And the first tool that probably everybody in this room who's a vendor already has is a SSL certificate. Technically, we should be using TLS. That's the new name. And just anytime you see SSL, think TLS instead. And my suggestion is if you already have SSL set up protecting your admin and protecting your checkout, consider moving it to your entire site. I'm currently running a podcast at this URL that is helping you do the technical details. So feel free to send your tech team towards that URL. And the second thing that you already have that you should be applying a lot of work to is your logs. Everything generates logs. It's Magento, PHP, your web server. Everything will be generating logs. And you have to be careful what it's logging, but also you have to be careful of how you're taking care of those logs. And I think Alex would be able to help us, to help demonstrate how important logs were when he had a breach.
So luckily, we contained the breach before I think real damage was done, and Visa gave us sort of they didn't respond anymore, so I know we did contain it. When I went to find a forensic audit company, now again, Visa didn't make me do it, but I decided I should just do it preemptively. The first thing they asked for were server logs. And I went, I don't know, maybe. Yeah, luckily, we did have them, and they were in the process of going through them when we actually found the breach. But it never had occurred to me as a merchant that I had to make sure that those server logs were intact, because the guy at the company was like, thank God you have these, because if you did not have these, we could not do our job. If we were required to have that forensic audit by Visa and they couldn't do it, we were done. We were no longer going to take credit cards. So if you're not doing logs, you need to turn them on right away.
I think no longer being able to take credit cards is the scariest thing,
Right.
A merchant can hear.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, the logs play an important part, and everything's generating logs right now. Just have a plan for how are you going to back them up. Are they not capturing credit cards? As Philip said, it's dangerous. But moving past that, let's go beyond what we already have. My first suggestion always would be to think about and speaking with your hosting company about a web application firewall. It works just like a regular PC firewall. It uses rules and heuristics to determine if a valid user is coming in to hit your Magento site or an attacker is trying something fishy. And it's the next conversation you need to have with your hosting company. And good hosting companies will have a plan in place and be able to have this discussion clearly with you. But be warned, like everything technology security related, it needs attention. And my next step up will show you why. Past web application firewalls, my suggestion is to think about static analyzers and dynamic scanners. What static analyzers do is it crawls through your code with a fine-tooth comb and looks for potential places where vulnerabilities exist. And what it should do is return some sort of data towards your continuous integration or your testing tool so your developers have that information nicely. That's not a PDF. And what dynamic scanners do is the opposite. It looks at, say, a QA version of your site, and it finds every input field, and then it just throws the kitchen sink at it. It just throws every vulnerability it knows about trying to break your site. And if it finds something, it would be nice if it could output data that you could plug into the web application firewall I spoke about a minute ago. So if you have your dynamic scanner finding vulnerabilities and talking to your web application firewall, your web application firewall could block those vulnerabilities from happening while your development team builds a fix for it. The important thing about these two tools is if you're going to implement them, look for ones that will give you feedback and get back to your continuous integration or get back to your WAF via XML export or something. More importantly, not a PDF report. Okay? And I know I haven't mentioned any specific tools or given names, and there's a reason why. Everyone's site is different, and some people need to protect APIs more versus protecting their website more. And I'd suggest you go to this URL. SecTool Market is an independent website that reviews all the tools that you could use for technology, and they will let you make an informed decision about what you'll be using. But we've covered the primary hurdles you have to get across, putting the right people in place, putting the right processes in place, and choosing your technology. But we still have to tackle the most important part of security. What's going to happen if everything goes sideways? If you do have a breach, how do you respond? Have you thought about it? And we're not about, sticking your head in the sand and pretending nothing's going to happen. We have to expect that our applications are being tested for weak points at all times. And think about what are we going to do when it happens. And I'm sure Alex will be happy to share how it feels to find out your application has been breached when you've been going day-to-day, business as usual.
It's interesting because it's horrifying. I mean, there's no other way to put it. But everything that these guys are talking about, I sat and do the PCI Compliance questionnaire. I have penetration testing. I have a very good credit card processor who requires these things. I mean, I've been with processors who never even mentioned PCI Compliance to me and didn't really seem to care until something happens, and then it's your fault, not theirs. So what was particularly challenging in our case is that we put all our security patches from Magento in 3 business days. I did rotate passwords. I did pass PCI penetration testing from outside sources. We also have, a good SSL brand. We also have a hacker safe thing, which I realized is really, and it sends me a report every day, but it's a PDF, and basically it's marketing. It's so customers feel safe on your site. Doesn't mean you are safe. So not having a response plan was definitely a failure. That was probably the biggest failure I had, because when it happened, I just started calling, I called our solution partner who said, okay, we'll do a code audit, we'll see what we can have. And I didn't have now I know exactly the first 3 calls I would make. And the one call I did not make, as silly as it sounds, is I didn't call Magento. And ultimately, they were the ones who figured it out. So definitely have a response plan in place. Make sure that you have put it somewhere where if you're not available, someone else on your staff is, so they know the steps to go through very quickly, because it's truly, it's not a joke. And if you're a small or medium-sized business, Visa, they don't care. If they feel like you're at risk, you will be finished. And it's a terrible place to try to come back from. Luckily, I didn't get to that point, but I looked over the abyss.
Wow. I know this sounds all really scary, but
It is.
I think we should, as we close up, we go out with a little bit of a positive note. Response plans are important, and they're incredibly complex. And I'm not sure how many of you have one already set up, but what I have done is I've put together a template, a Magento-centric response plan. It helps you, it kind of guides you in putting all the parts in place. And you can get it from this URL. It's free to distribute, it's free to use, and I ask you to just grab it, download it, try to implement what it will look like for your company, and then test it. Do a drill. Pretend something has infiltrated your site, and test your response plan. See how everything goes. And if something doesn't work out too well, revise it, adapt it, and keep on testing your response plan, because the day something goes wrong, you will know how to respond, and you'll be on top of it. But
I would like to add what a comprehensive response plan includes: internal response and external response. The way that you communicate to your customers is going to determine whether they're going to trust you in the future or not. So being thoughtful about that, and not writing those emails in the thick of the moment,
Yes.
but having them prepared ahead of time so that they're reasoned and thought through, and don't hide things from your customers. If there was a massive data breach, you're best to react quick and to tell them the full story right up front. But don't hide anything, but to reassure them that everything's going to be okay, because we have Magento, we have a response plan, we know what we're supposed to do in this case, and we're all working full out to resolve it. So it's about creating trust and maintaining the trust. They've already placed their trust in you by buying on your site. Now you have to maintain that trust in a hard time.
yeah, and to that point, and just thank you, Alex, for being so honest about something that's very difficult to talk about.
I feel like, yeah, I got BD.
Thank you.